Now to some good news about your life and not about our politicians. Australia's economy is getting dragged back to almost where it was before the pandemic started. And before, remember when Victoria just shut down rather than fight this virus fast? Bang. Anyway, the national accounts figures today were better than expected. Growth in the last 3 months of last year, up 3.1%.
This is the first time in recorded history that Australia has seen 2 consecutive quarters of economic growth of more than 3%. The Australian economy has recovered 85% of its COVID-induced fall.
Well, let's see what Ross Greenwood makes of it. I was joined earlier by Ross, who's now the Sky News business editor and host of Business Weekend on Sky News every Sunday at 11 a.m. Ross Greenwood, thank you so much for joining me. Growth last quarter, better than expected. But then again, we didn't actually expect very much in the first place. So is this good news or bad?
It's the classic V-shaped recovery. When coronavirus hit, Australia's economy fell as hard as it's ever fallen. And now, over the past 2 quarters to the end of December, it's risen as much as it's ever risen before. It's still around 1.1% below where it was this time last year, so not completely recovered. But you would have to say now that we're sort of in the beginning of March. Another quarter has passed by since these numbers were printed. And you can only expect that Australia's economy now is probably even in better shape than it was before it entered the pandemic. So from the government's point of view, the many tens and hundreds of billions of dollars that have been spent trying to support the economy and JobKeeper and so many other programs that were put in place, it's worked, because what you could see is that the public got out there and started spending in ways in which they haven't spent in many, many decades, and that has underpinned the growth in Australia over these past couple of quarters.
Retail therapy seems to have been a magic cure. But why, in fact, is it better than expected, Ross? Is that because people were too pessimistic about how the coronavirus would hit? There were claims, predictions from the authorities that there'd be 150,000 deaths and all that kind of stuff. Is it because of that, or because the economy was handled so much better?
The economy was handled well, there's no doubt about that. The government did the classic response when you have an economic shock, and that was it literally borrowed money and printed money, cut interest rates to zero through the Reserve Bank. But there's a second factor about this. There was pent-up demand in the Australian consumers, locked up in their houses during dark winter nights. They basically craved going out and being able to spend their money. And when the government gave them access to their superannuation funds, when there were people who ultimately were paid more under JobKeeper than what they were paid during their normal working lives, once there was an ability to go out and spend, they spent. And the other thing that they also started to do, and we've seen this with the house price increases, the rebound there in the last little while, we know that when people buy houses, that what they tend to do is that they buy furniture, they buy white goods, they buy electrical goods. And so really, in many ways, it was the pent-up demand. The final part about it, Australians not being able to travel overseas. And by being not able to travel overseas, they spent their money at home rather than spending it overseas. Sure, we didn't have the international tourists, the international students coming here to Australia to spend, but by gee, the Australian population certainly spent. And you can tell this also through one key statistic, the household savings ratio. So this basically measures the amount of money you're earning and the amount of money you're saving. During the depths of the pandemic, when people get scared, they save money. And so at the height of it, they were saving around 22% of their income, which was a record level. By the following the end of September, it was 17%, now just 12%. So in other words, people have got their confidence up, and they're not just spending what they're earning, but they're actually also spending some of those savings that they'd actually put aside during the darkest days of winter.
Well, it just makes you think what the debt burden will be going forward. But to be honest, this is looking much better than we feared. I think almost anyone thought would happen. So that has to be good news. Ross Greenwood, thank you so much indeed for your time.
No problems at all.